Today, it's my very special honor to welcome the future Dr. Valentina Gonzalez to the podcast once again. She is a favorite in the field. Whenever I talk about people who you should go to for elementary school, I bow to two people. Dr. Katie Topo, and the future, Dr. Valentina Gonzalez. You have written a book that has been a bestseller of bestsellers, reading and writing for English learners. Let me tell you, it was so well received. I've seen that internationally when other schools, I'm like, yep, I know that purple book. But now you have teamed up with the incredible Dr. Nancy Fry and Dr. Douglas Fisher. But most importantly, it's from you. It's called Welcome to Teaching Multilingual Learners, an illustrated guide. I was like, yes, this is the kind of book we've been looking for. So, Valentina Gonzalez, welcome back to the podcast.
Aw, thank you, Ton. I'm so excited to be here. I always love spending time with you and just talking, and being on the podcast is really an honor. Thank you.
Oh, it's an honor to have such a luminary in the field who one of the brightest lights that light our way. So, let's talk about your book. What was the seed for this book?
Well, it's really exciting because Doug Fisher not texted me, but he messaged me. I think it was on Twitter, and he was telling me how he liked some of my graphics and wanted to see if I would be okay with him using some in some of his writing, and we got to communicating, and he said, "I have an idea. Do you want to talk?" And so we met on Zoom, and he told me about this idea about combining our knowledge on education and writing a book about multilingual learners, but incorporating my graphics, the illustrations that I do into this book. And he had this vision for a book that would serve teachers of multilingual learners in a way that it could be really easy to digest. So, something that teachers would be able to look at visually and also read as they use this resource, and be kind of a foundation for teachers who are maybe new to the field or new to teaching multilingual learners. And the way he explained it was like almost like a graphic novel, or like a comic of sorts. Um, just the way it's visually displayed. And because we use a lot of visuals with multilingual learners, we liked the pairing of this idea. And so we got to talking about, what this book would look like, and how it might be structured, and what we would include in it. And we didn't want it to be too long, so we really got down to the nitty gritty and the bolts of, well, if you are new to teaching or new to teaching multilingual learners, what would be the essence? What are the important things? And so we started with that, and it grew into this book, Welcome to Teaching Multilingual Learners.
Well, there's very few people who produce such beautiful graphics. I have seen your graphics again when I travel internationally or when different presentations, people will show your graphics visually, and I'm like, that's my friend Valentina. And so you, of course, you would be asked by Dr. Fisher and Dr. Freight for to collaborate with you on the book because it just adds the visual elements and it just makes it just so approachable. Let's talk about your book, about how you organized it. You have the why, how, and what, which is based on Simon Sinek's work. Would you tell us about that?
Yes. Organizing a book is really important. You want it to be easy to use after you've published it. You want teachers to be able, or educators, anyone who puts their hands on it, to be able to easily use the book and its features. So, Simon Sinek, you may or may not know, and Ton, you've probably heard about Simon. he's this wonderful expert in leadership, and I think we can use him in a lot of other ways. But he's not only an author, he's done a lot of TED Talks, and he gained a lot of popularity on this TED Talk he did, uh, uh, organized around the concept of the golden circle. And he explains how great leaders and organizations inspire people through their why. Not what they do, but why they do it, how they do it, and then there's the what. So the golden circle is like three concentric circles. And the inner circle is the why, it's the core purpose. And for me, whenever I do presentations, when I visit with schools or coach, I always start with my why I do what I do. I share my story, my immigration story, my language story, my teaching story. That's why I'm here. It's why I serve students and colleagues. This is our purpose. This is our belief and our mission. It should anchor everything else that happens from here on out. So we started our book with our why, and we push teachers and educators and readers to begin to find their why, their core, their belief, their purpose for doing what they do, whether it's for multilingual learners or for all students in general. The second part of the book is the how, and that's the process or the values. This is the middle part of Simon Sinek's circle. And when he talks about, if you ever watch the video that Simon Sinek does, he equates it. He talks about Apple, like not apples that you eat, but Apple organization that does phones and computers and all of that. And he talks about how Apple, their why is not to make cell phones and computers. Their why is to change the way we think. And their how is to innovate, design for all of their technology. So our why is our purpose, and our how is the way we process our values. It's it, in our book, our how consists of how we do the things we do in our school systems. It's our programs and the way we make sure students feel a sense of belonging and incorporate our our why, our beliefs, and our mission into our classrooms. And finally, that what, this is what people see when they look at us, when they look at our classrooms and our lesson plans. This is the outermost circle. And when Simon Sinek talks about this, he talks about, well, Apple makes computers and they make iPhones and they make software. That's what you see. In our classrooms, this is the actual nitty gritty of our lesson design. And in the book, we talk about vocabulary and grammar and all the foundational skills that we teach in our lesson plans. What does that look like when you write your lesson plans for multilingual learners? And so I really think that these three sections lay out a good foundation for the way we work to serve multilingual learners.
Well, tell us about your why, like your personal why, before we go into the why in the book. What is your personal why with working with multilingual learners, Valentina?
I mean, it starts with being an immigrant myself and speaking a language other than English from birth. And so my why comes from that experience and knowing what it feels like to be in a classroom learning English as an additional language. It comes from understanding how children learn a different language and experience new culture and experience the feeling of belonging or feeling like an outsider. And then it comes from being that teacher in the classroom and understanding what it's like to lesson plan and create experiences that truly make students feel valued and make them feel part of the classroom, that they have purpose. My why is to help teachers feel connected and help them feel like they are supported in this experience so that every child can be a part of the classroom community and the school community.
Would you tell us a story about that from the past where you've seen like your why of having students feel like they're part of the school, feel like they're part of the community? What does that look like in a personal experience?
You know, when you ask me that, I immediately go to a couple of a couple of personal stories of when I co-taught. Um, I co-taught in elementary classrooms, and co-teaching really was probably the best professional development I ever had in my career because I traveled to different classrooms, worked with different teachers, learned strategies and teaching methods from teachers who had different experiences and knowledge. And um, we had one student who came to us in the middle of the year, and it's always hard to join a classroom in the middle of the year, whether you're from a different country, speak another language, or not. It's hard to join a classroom that's already established. And so this student, he his family came from Venezuela, and his father sat outside in the office with the counselor, and they tried very hard to bring him to our classroom, our third grade classroom. As he cried his eyes out, he did not want to come into our classroom. The father and the counselor dragged him in reluctantly. They literally pulled him into the classroom. When he came into our classroom, my co-teacher and we tried everything we could to make him feel welcome, to make him feel like we we did. We loved getting new kids, but for some reason, and we didn't know at the time, he didn't want to be there. And once the counselor and the father left, he curled up into a ball in the corner of the classroom and continued to weep. And the rest of the class, they were so compassionate and empathetic. They tried everything to let him know that we want you here. We love you. They tried everything, but nothing could get past whatever emotions he was having at the moment, whether it was just being new or something else more traumatic. Weeks later, we found out that this child who didn't know English yet and was brand new to our country was feeling so alone at the moment, had also lost his mother. So he was struggling with so many traumatic feelings at the time. We embraced him with all of our hearts and with open arms, and we slowly, we never gave up on him. You know, we just we made sure that he felt like he belonged in this classroom. And by the end of that school year, because we had made sure that he knew he was part of this class, uh, he didn't want to leave. He did not, he loved our school and the class. To this day, he became part of, he became part of the school climate, part of the, what is that called? The word escapes me. Um, Student council. He became part of student council. They voted and elected him. Um, he became part of the football team in high school. It was years later by this time. I mean, he played soccer as well before that, but we connected him to make sure that he could feel a purpose and sense of belonging. And this was really important. And I think that that's the biggest takeaway from making sure that kids understand that we want them here, that they're important. It's connecting them to some part, attaching them to some part of the school system and classroom.
Do you remember with this Venezuelan kid, what did you do to make him feel welcomed and part of the classroom?
It was small and big things. Every little thing counted. So making sure we had that seat for him in the classroom, number one, just having that space, a buddy, all of the little things, taking him around the school, those small things that added up, having something that resembled the school from the beginning so that he felt like, oh, I have this and so do they. And then making sure that he was part of a community. So when we had clubs, or if there was something extra outside of the school hours, he could start being part of it. If he wasn't there one day, or if he came late, we made sure he knew that we missed him, that we noticed he wasn't there. And he started to see, well, oh, you know they know I'm not here. They want me here. And those little things over time make a big difference. Being intentional about grouping was really important for us because we wanted him to feel like he wasn't alone. But we also wanted to have high expectations from him. And we knew that he had a lot to teach us, to teach his peers. So we wanted to position him from his assets. Even though he couldn't maybe communicate in English yet, we knew that he had a wealth of knowledge within him that he could share with us, experiences that we had never had before. And so, even though he couldn't maybe tell us in English, he could communicate those things somehow, whether it was through writing in Spanish or drawing or communicating in Spanish. Sometimes we paired him with Spanish speaking peers, and sometimes we paired him with English speaking peers, and we wanted him to show us what he could do. We didn't want him to feel like he wasn't able to express himself in that first language. His first language was an asset, and we didn't want him to be quiet all day. And certainly we didn't want to force him to speak, but we wanted to encourage him to communicate in any way that he could communicate. So, bringing in his culture, bringing in the experiences he had was really important to us. And it wasn't always easy. Sometimes we had to do some research. We had to find out what were things that maybe he knew about. And we had to do some Google searching and find out information that maybe he would have some funds of knowledge about, and bring in pictures, bring in some things that would light up his eyes. And as soon as we saw that little spark, we would bring him in and say, "Tell us what you know about that. Show us what you know." And even, a child that sees something that they can relate to, you can immediately see that spark that happens, and they want to share. They want to tell what they know as well. But we wanted our the other kids in the class to recognize that this kid knows things. This kid has information, and we can learn from him too.
Right. Their experiences really count. When I share the exact same things about like bringing students' cultures in and having students connect to the curriculum through their cultures, um, teachers often ask, well, where does English come in if students are going to just speaking Spanish and then talking about their cultures a lot? So I'll forward that question to you, Valentina. What do you do when teachers say like, that's great, lovely. How do you incorporate English?
Yeah. And so when we have students that speak another language and can communicate in that language, we encourage that. We want them, we invite those other languages, and then we we also add English. So if he shares with us about the government in Venezuela, or a monument in Venezuela, or a landmark, a geographical feature, and we're labeling it on this visual, perhaps, then we may label it in Spanish, or we may have him label it in Spanish in front of the class, which also demonstrates his language and what he can do. And then, because we're labeling something, I can now label it in English as well. So now we're moving and adding English. And my students who don't speak Spanish are also getting the benefit of seeing another language. They're not learning Spanish, perhaps. They're not they're not actually getting a bilingual education, but they're being exposed to another language. And there's nothing wrong with that. Being exposed to other languages is a healthy experience. It adds more to our knowledge set. Now I'm seeing, and if I do see cognates, if I do see, or if I see letters or sounds that are different, maybe I can point those out at this time too. So I'm getting some of that cross linguistic experience, and those are benefits to all of my students as well. But to your point, Ton, I'm moving that language. I'm adding language here. So when my student labels in Spanish, I validate that language, I validate that knowledge, and now I'm adding English. And then we say the sentence in English, and the whole class is going to say it. I may write the sentence stem, or I may write the entire sentence, and now we're going to orally read it. I may say it the first time, and now we're going to orally read it. So we're all verbalizing. And my new student may listen the first time because he needs to hear what those words sound like. He may not have ever heard them before, or seen them before. This may be a first experience, but the more we read it and repeat it, the more comfortable he's going to get with chorally reading as a class.
Well, there you go. So practical. You talking about an example of additive language instruction, not subtractive of like, no, no Spanish. No, we're going to add your English. We're going to add your Spanish, and we're going to add on top of that English with that. Perfect. So you kind of already started us with the how. So in your how section, you have three parts: creating a sense of belonging, and what do teachers do to for clarity, and lessons design. Could you talk about those three parts?
Okay, so with teacher clarity, um, and clarity and lesson design go hand in hand. In the book, on page 134, we really talk about the three essential questions for teacher clarity. So the first question is, what am I learning today? And students really need to know what they're going to be learning today. And a lot of times in EL education or multilingual education, we talk about content objectives and language objectives. So teacher clarity really goes hand in hand with those objectives. What am I going to be learning today? The next part of teacher clarity is, why am I learning this? Students are going to be more engaged if they know the reason for this. Why is this important? Why am I going to use this in daily life? And that's really important for kids to know. Like, is this something I'm going to use outside of the classroom? How is this going to be useful to me every day? And how will I know I've learned it? And that's part of the success criteria. How will I know that I've mastered what you're asking me to learn today? Teacher clarity is about ensuring that students actually leave the lesson knowing what we have put into the lesson plans. So we're being very clear about those three questions. And in the book, there's a really nice chart that kind of outlines all three of those questions. So when we start with question one, what am I learning? These are the intentions. I'm intending to ensure that kids are learning this, and this today. The learning intentions are directly related to the standards. Those are like content objectives or language objectives. When we teach multilingual learners, we want to make sure we have both content and language objectives and that they're student friendly. They're clearly written for students to understand. When we look at the second question, why am I learning this? Remember, it's all about that relevancy that students understand that this is relevant to me, that it matters, that it's important, and students recognize that the task is aligned with how it impacts either themselves or the people around them. And finally, that third question, how will I know that I've learned it? Well, there's a lot of ways we can do that. We can make sure that at the end we've given them a list of success criteria. We've clarified for them, this is how you will know that you've mastered it. Let's reflect back. So we always look back at the success criteria. We always look back at the objectives and let students be metacognitive and think about, did you get here? Did you meet this success criteria? And if not, what do we do? How do we handle a situation where we didn't meet the success criteria? We're not just going to move along if we didn't meet the success criteria. Because if we keep moving, then we may have some gaps that will affect future learning.
Right. Let's go to the last part, which is the what section. What's the biggest, this is the biggest section of your book. What will readers find here? And what were your favorite parts of this section?
You're right. This is the biggest part. And I think this is the biggest part because the biggest part of what we do with multilingual learners is the nitty gritty. It's the lesson planning, it's the working with students. And really, when we wrote the book, there was so much more we wanted to include. So in the what section, readers are going to find a lot of information about foundational skills and culturally inclusive pedagogy, oral language skills, teaching vocabulary, grammar, and also just structuring a lesson. And when I think about what was my favorite part, it's again, it's really hard to pick which one of these was my favorite. I teeter-totter between multiple sections. I think that possibly oral language skills was my favorite part. I think because oracy is so important when teaching multilingual learners, and it's often forgotten because a lot of times we don't grade speaking. In the classroom, there's not a grade for speaking except for when you're maybe taking the ML exam, the students, are assessed on that. But in the grade book, there's no grade for speaking. And so sometimes that gets forgotten or pushed aside. But oral language skills really are important. And that means the listening and the speaking. And a lot of our kids receive that listening and speaking in their first language for years and years and years, so that listening and speaking vocabulary became so large and filled with rich words, and not only words, but language structures and ways of communicating in their first language. And then they came to another country, maybe America, maybe Vietnam, maybe, and wherever they are. And then they began to speak in another language, and they haven't built that new language system yet. And so that oral language that oracy, that listening and speaking is so important when we're acquiring another language, especially in the classroom, because social language is so different than that academic language. Both are important, but that academic language involves a lot of words that we don't use socially. Not only a lot of words that we don't use socially, but a lot of language structures that we don't use when we're talking to a friend or we're just talking casually. So, incorporating oral language methods in our classroom every day, every classroom is very important for kids who are acquiring another language. It's also beneficial for every other child because, that communication piece helps when kids are reading and writing as well. So I guess I could say that oral language skills is maybe my favorite section in the book.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, let's say that again. Yeah, that quote of like reading and writing flow in a sea of talk by James Britton is just comes to mind when I think about working with multilingual learners. Can you share with a few structures you use to integrate oracy into language into classes?
Yes, it's so much fun. Integrating oracy into classrooms is actually a lot of fun. And even with older kids, we can integrate chants and songs. And I say this because in younger classrooms, it's really popular to hear kids singing and using songs for learning. I'm not just talking about singing for fun. I'm talking about incorporating songs with academic language. I used to do this 20 years ago when I was in the classroom. I mean, I haven't been out of the classroom for 20 years, but even when I first started teaching, it was harder back then because we didn't have any kind of AI to help us invent songs. So we had to take songs like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and think of how do we make a song about the life cycle of a butterfly using the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or whatever we were learning. Literally, we made these songs up. It's so funny, but nowadays I just go to Chat GPT and I type in create a song to the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, incorporate the life cycle of a butterfly, and include these vocabulary words for a first grader or for a fifth grader. And so it creates it. And then I can tweak it if I need to. And then we use that. We know that songs and rhythm are so important for all learners. Like the brain loves that. The brain loves rhythm. And so chants and songs are awesome. As kids get older, I wouldn't use Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I'm going to use a song that is popular and I'm going to let them help me build this chant or this song that goes with it. And I've done this before and kids love it. We start first as a class, we'll take a popular song from Taylor Swift or whoever's popular, right now at the time, and we'll take the lyrics of that song and then we'll change the lyrics to what we're learning about. And then once they get the idea, then I let them the next time do it with groups or partners. And then they have to sing it as a class. And it is so fun. I'll give you another example of how we can incorporate oracy and and using partners and groups. And that way it's academic, but it's also social and it's building that community and relationships. I mean, games are a great way to do this. Academic, we take a game that's a lot of fun and we make it academic. Barrier games are really great for this. So, a barrier game is when there's a barrier between us. It's kind of like the old game Battleship. I don't know if you remember that game, but Battleship, each player has like a little board and you can't see what I have, and I can't see what you have. but we have to communicate to each other in order to achieve the goal. And so in our classroom, we would do this similarly. And with a barrier game for multilingual learners, I mean, it could be academic or it could be linguistic. We might have them each draw something on their folder that they're going to bury. Uh, they're going to cover from each other, and then they have to communicate to each other what it is that they have, and each person has to try to draw what the other one has. It could be a map. It could be a math problem. It could be it could be words in different areas of a grid. So we're keeping information from each other and then trying to communicate to each other how to recreate what each person has.
These activities are so fun that they involve collaboration, they involve social language, academic language, use of content-specific words. So I know teachers will have lots of fun with including oracy, but that's important. Just integrating opportunities for students to speak because when they speak, they're processing, and with that processing, they're learning. Let's end the podcast this way, Valentina. It's been so great to connect with you, and thank you for creating this resource with Dr. Fry and Dr. Fisher. It's going to be one of those books that every teacher who's new to the field will be given to them by the district or professors in university. But like, let's read this first because it's just the foundation, but it makes it accessible and practical. So you're just known for practical, intentional ideas that make things accessible. So I hope teachers get the book. It's fabulous. People have loved your first book, and of course, they'll love this collaborative one as well. Let's end with you talked about 20 years. So, um, being in the classroom, after 20 plus years of being in classroom and many, many years of supporting teachers at the professional development level, what do you know is true about working with multilingual learners?
One thing I know that's true about multilingual learners is that they are they each have something special to share with us, and they teach us more than we teach them.
That could not be more true. And so you are a person that reminds us how special our students are through the work that you do, through the graphics that you have, and now, of course, the books. And thank you for creating a space for us on Facebook where we can remember how special our students are. Dr. Valentina Gonzalez, thank you again for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Tan. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us too.